Hey, what's up guys? So in this project we're going to be building a React application that reaches out to the PixaBay API and brings in images by search. Okay, so it's basically an image searching app, and we're also going to be using Material UI, which is a library. It's basically it allows us to use the material design, Google's material design, through React components instead of bringing in, let's say, materialized CSS and just manually putting in the classes and stuff like that. We can actually have pre-made components for things like the app bar, for things like the grid, buttons, and all that. And there's some pretty good documentation here as well. If you go down, just like any other framework, it has all the documentation. It has examples, and if you look at the code, for instance, if we want the app bar, we would bring that in as a component, and we would use that as a component, pass in some properties. Down here you have all the available properties. All right, so we'll be doing that. Let's give a quick example or a quick demo of this. Let's say we wanted to search for images of dogs. I'll go ahead and just start typing, and immediately as I start typing, it's going to reach out to the API and bring back anything that matches that query. So I'll just say DOG, and now you can see we have a list of dogs. All right, and we can also change the amount. Let's say we wanted only 5 pictures. Let's search for computer, and you'll see that we'll get 5 images of computers. And another thing that we're going to implement is the dialog for Material UI. So if I click on this zoom icon, it's going to open up a dialog with that image. Okay, now these actually don't have titles, so I just use the tags right here, and then also the user that uploaded it. And if we look at the documentation real quick for PixaBay, the API is actually really nice. There's a lot of options, and then you get all of this data back. Okay, you get the total hits, and then the hits is the actual array of images of objects, and it has the URLs, it has preview URLs, it has the height and width, the views, the downloads, the user, the comments, all that stuff. So you can extend this application if you want. If you want to bring in some more of this data, you can do that, and that's a great way to learn. But this is what we'll be building in this project, so let's get started. All right, so the first thing that you're going to want to do if you want to follow along here is create your own PixaBay account so that you can get an API key. So if you go to pixabay.com and just register, confirm your email or whatever, log in. You can see I'm already logged in here, and then go to this URL, which is pixabay.com/API/docs. And if you scroll down, your API key will automatically be shown here in green. Okay, so make sure you use your own API key and not mine, and we'll be adding that to our app later. So let's go ahead and create a React application. Now, if you don't already have Create React App installed, just go ahead and do an npm install -g create-react-app, and that will install the CLI. All right, once you do that, you just want to go ahead and run create-react-app and then name your application. I'm going to call this, let's call it PixaBay _image_finder. Okay, and that's going to generate a new application for us, or a boilerplate app. All right, so now that that's done, I'm just going to cd into PixaBay _image_finder, and I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code. Okay, and that's the text editor I'm using. You don't have to use it, but use whatever you want. So from here, I'm going to open up my integrated terminal now. I'm no longer going to use git bash. Well, I'm going to use it down here. And it's not letting me clear. I hate when it does this. I don't know why it does this. All right, so now what we want to do is just install a couple dependencies. We're going to need Material UI, and then we're also going to be using Axios to make our requests. So let's go ahead and say npm install or Axios, and also material-UI. And those will get added to our package.json file. All right. Oh, looks like I need to update npm real quick. Let me do that. Get rid of that. So if you ever need to update npm, you just do npm I or install -g npm, and that'll update you to the latest version. All right. So now what I want to do, I cannot clear this. So now what I want to do is let's start our server. So we'll go ahead and we'll just run npm start, and that'll start up our React server and application, and we get our boilerplate. Good. So let's head into let's change the title first of all before I forget. So public index.html. I'm just going to go down here and change this title from React app to PixaBay image finder and save. All right, and then let's clean this up a little. We don't want any of this layout here. So I'm going to keep the app.css, but just delete everything in it and save that. And then let's delete the logo.svg. We don't want that. Okay, and let's delete, or let's go into app.js, get rid of this line where it's bringing in the logo, and then as far as our main app goes, we can get rid of everything inside the main div, and for now we'll just say hello. And we'll save that, and we should just get hello. All right, so let's start with creating our component. So in the source folder, I'll create a folder called components. And we're just going to have a couple components here. One is going to be the navbar. So we'll create a, I want to create a folder actually called navbar. And then inside here we'll have a file called navbar.js. And I'm using Pascal case here. Start with a capital, and every word will begin with a capital. In addition to navbar, let's create another folder called search. So this will be our search component. We'll create a file called search.js, and then we're going to have one more folder, and we're going to call this image-results for the folder name, and then for the file name, image results.js. All right, we're not using Redux. You could, but it's kind of overkill for what we're doing. What we're going to do is we'll have the search component, and then we're going to embed the image results component in the search component, and that's where all the results will show with the grid and all that stuff. All right. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you could do it. So let's start with our navbar. That's actually going to be really, really simple. So I'm going to head to navbar.js, and we're going to create a functional component. Now, if you're using React and VS Code, I would highly recommend this extension. It's called ES7 React Redux GraphQL React Native Snippets, this one right here. And it allows you to just really quickly create React components and just all kinds of stuff to do with GraphQL. So I can just say RFC tab, and it'll give me a functional component. Okay, I do want to clean this up a little bit. For example, I want to take the export default and just cut that out, and let's create a variable called navbar and set that to our functional component, and then we'll export navbar down here. And then since all we're doing is we're gonna just use an app bar from Material UI, we don't even need like the curly braces and the return and stuff. So for now, I'm going to get rid of all that, and I'm going to bring in app bar from Material UI / app bar, and then right here in our arrow function we'll just go ahead and call that component. Whoops. So we want app bar, and we're just going to put in a title. Okay, so for our title we'll say PixaBay image finder, and we'll save this component. All right, very, very simple. And then we'll go to our app.js, and of course we need to bring this in. So we'll go up here and we'll say import navbar from and we want to go inside of our components folder, inside Navbar, and we want our Navbar component. And then I'm just going to stick that, let's see, in this return, we'll just go ahead and say Navbar like that. Okay, and I'm using Prettier, so when I save, you'll see that it automatically formats. Now we're getting an error here because we actually need to bring in the MUI or the Material UI theme provider, which you can kind of think of as like the Redux provider. We have to wrap it around the rest of everything in our app in order to use the correct components. So we need to bring this in. Let's go right here and let's say import MUI theme provider from, and it's going to be from Material UI, Material UI /styles/ MUI theme provider. And then what we have to do is wrap around everything in our render or in our return. So I'm actually going to just, let's replace this with some parentheses, and we want to put in our MUI theme provider beginning tag and then the ending tag. Okay, and then inside here we're going to put a div, and then inside here is where we'll put our navbar. Alright, so let's save that, and there we go. So now we have our navbar with the Material UI app bar. So now let's move on to our search. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to bring in our search component. So right under the navbar, let's bring in search, and of course that'll be from search /search, and then we just want to stick that right under the navbar like that. Alright, so that actually should be it for the app.js. It's going to break because we haven't created anything in our search file, but that's it for the app.js. So we can close that up, and now we can close the navbar up, and let's head into our search.js file. Okay, I'm just going to make this less, and I'm also going to close the sidebar up. Now I'm going to make this a class-based component, so I'm going to say RCC tab, and again, if you want this functionality in VS Code, then you want to use the ES7, what the hell is it? ES7 React Redux GraphQL extension. So I'm going to change the class name to search, and let's bring the export default down to the bottom. And we also want to bring in a couple things up here. So the text field is going to come from Material UI as well as the select field. So I'm going to import those two things. So we'll say import text field from, and that's going to be from Material-UI/text field like that. Okay, and then we also want the select field. I'm going to just change this to select field, and change this to select field as well. Okay, we'll need some other stuff as well, but we'll just stick with this for now. Now in our component, we're going to have some state. Okay, so we could create a constructor and put our state there, but I'm just going to define it like this, just as a single object or a single variable, and we're going to put in our search text and set that to nothing by default. This is going to be the state for our text field. We'll also have the amount, which will be the state for the select. I'm going to put 15 as the default. Let's also put in our API URL here, which is going to be the PixaBay URL, so https pixabay.com/API. And then you also want your API key here, which I'm going to grab from the documentation, and of course you want to use your own. So let's paste that in. And then lastly, we're just going to have images, which is going to be an empty array to begin with. And then once we make our request and we fetch our images, we'll fill this array. Okay, so now let's go down to our render. And inside the render, let's go, or inside the div, I should say, let's put our text field. So we're using the text field component from Material UI, and we're going to add some properties here. So I'm going to add a name of search text, and whoops, we don't want a comma there. We want a value of this dot state dot search text. Okay, so it's going to be directly connected to that state value. And then on change, so basically when it changes, when we type anything in, I want to run a function called on text change. Okay, and then the next two properties are going to be from Material UI. We want one called floating label text, which is basically just the label, and it's just going to say search for images. And then the next one is going to be full width, because I want the input to go all the way across, and we're going to set that to true. All right, so if we save this, it should actually show up. Okay, so there's our input, good. And underneath that, we're going to put our select field. All right, now there's one more thing we need to bring in to use a select. I'll actually show you in the documentation. If we go to select field and we look at the code here, we need to bring in this menu item, because for each we basically don't use option, like an option tag in standard HTML. We use these menu items, so we need to bring that in as well. So I'll just copy that line and bring that in. All right, and then what I'll do is copy, let's see, we'll go ahead and just copy this select field here. All right, and we'll go, let's just add a line break and paste that in, and then I'm just going to add another line break under it. So for this select field, it's going to have a name of amount. Okay, floating label text, we're going to change that to amount. Value is going to be this dot state dot amount. Okay, remember we put that in the state, it's 15 by default. And then on change, so when someone selects something, we want it to call on amount change. All right, and then for the menu items here, we're going to have 5, 10. Okay, these are the values. So 5, 10, 15, we'll do 30, and then 50 will be the most. And then we'll do the same here, 5, and these will just be strings, so 10, 15. This is basically what is displayed to the user. Same thing as option and value, 50. All right, so that's our select. If we save that, and now you can see we have our select here with all the different options. Good. Now, when we start to type here, and I can't type anything because we haven't created the on text change, and we basically haven't linked our value to the search text state. Every time we type, it should update that state. So let's go ahead and create a function called on text change, and we're going to use an arrow function. So as a parameter, it'll take in the event, and then we'll set that to our function. All right, and we're using arrows here so that we don't have to do dot bind this, because we would have to do that if we didn't use arrows. So from here, we want to say this dot set state, and basically in here we want to set, I'm going to put some brackets, and we're going to say e.target.name. So it's basically going to look at whatever the name is. So in this case, search text, and then we want to set the search text in the state to whatever the value is, and we can get that with e.target.value. Okay, so it's important that your name here matches the state name, because that's where this comes in. And this is very helpful when you have multiple fields. So we want to do that, and just doing that, we should now be able to at least type. Okay, so we can now type in that field. Good. Now, when we type, we actually want to send out a request to our API. So for that, we're going to bring in Axios. And remember, we installed that in the beginning. So we're going to say import Axios from Axios. Okay, you could use fetch as well if you wanted to. And then when we set the state here, so we set the target, the name to the value, we can actually pass in a callback. So we're going to go right after this curly brace and put a comma, and then we're going to put an arrow function here. Whoops. All right, so this will run immediately after, and this is where we want to make our request. So we're going to say Axios dot get, okay, because we want to make a get request. And actually, we don't want that. In here, we're going to use backticks because it's going to be a template literal. So we want the URL, which we have in our state, so we can actually use this syntax and say this.state.api URL. All right, and then we want to do slash, and then a parameter of key equals, and this is where we put our API key. So we can say, whoops, we want to put that here, and we want to say this.state.api key. Let me make this bigger. You know what, we'll make this full screen, and let's make this full screen, and we'll just switch like this instead. Now, in addition to the URL and the key, we need to pass in our query. It needs to know what we're searching for. So to put another parameter, we'll use the ampersand, and then we want the Q parameter. Okay, we want to set that equal to our query or our search text, which is in this.state.search text. Okay, and then after that, we actually want to put the image type. So we're going to put another ampersand, and we're going to say image underscore type, and we want to set that to photo. All right, then we want to put another parameter of per underscore page, and then this is where we want to put the amount. So we're going to say this.state.amount. All right, and then one more parameter, we're going to say ampersand safe search, and we're going to set that equal to true. And honestly, I really don't know what safe search is. I guess we can look at that real quick. Let's see, safe search, a flag indicating that only images suitable for all ages be returned. That's what I figured it was, but I wasn't sure. So no, I guess, inappropriate images. All right, so now that we have that inside our Axios.get, it's going to give us a promise. So we want a .then, and in our .then it's going to give us a response. And then what we want to do is we want to set the state. We want to say this.setState, and we want to set the, basically we're going to get the response in res.data. Now remember, in the API, if we look at the response, what we want is this array here, and it's in hits. Okay, so we want res.data.hits. That's where the images will be located, or the image array, the array of objects. So let's say we want to set images, which is an empty array to begin with. We want to set it to res.data.hits, just like that. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and we'll add on a .catch here in case something goes wrong, and let's just console.log the error. All right, so now if we save this, let's before we test it out, let's go to our render, and let's just console.log this.state. Okay, so now we'll go back to our application, and let's open up our console here, and you can see it's logging our state, and what we want to look at is images. Okay, actually, let's log this.state.images because we don't really care about anything else at this point. All right, so we'll do that, and you can see it's an empty array. Now if I go and I type something in here like a D, we get this 15 results of different images. Okay, so it'll give us all the image URL and all that good stuff. And every time I type, so DOG, that'll give us another one. So it'll keep giving us these results, and that's what we want. Now the results, the images themselves, I don't want to show in this particular component. I want those to show in the image results component. Okay, so what we'll do here is, actually, you know what, before we do that, let's implement our select functionality. So we want to be able to limit the amount, and that's pretty easy. All we really have to do is go and create our onAmount change. Remember, we linked the onChange to that function. So we're going to go right here and say onAmount change, and we're going to use an arrow here. We'll say event. It also takes in an index and then the value. Okay, whatever the selected value, and then we just want to set the state. So this dot set state, and we want to set, of course, the amount, and we want to set that to whatever that value is, and save. All right, and then if we go and do what we just did, let's change this to, let's say 5, and let's put in something here, and now you'll see we only get 5 results. Okay, so that's what we want. So now for the image results, we're going to bring that component in. Even though we didn't create it yet, we're going to just bring it in here and say image results from, and we want to go outside of the current folder into image dash results, and then we want to load image results. Did I call it image result? I did. Let's add an S onto that, like that. All right. So we bring image results in, and then we're going to go down. Let's see, we're going to go right under this line break, and we want to put a conditional. So I'm going to use a ternary operator. We're going to say if this dot state dot images dot length. So this is an array of images. If the length is greater than 0, then we want to show the image results component. Okay, and then we obviously that needs to know the images to load, so we're going to pass those in as a property. So we'll say images equals this dot state dot images. All right, else then I'm just going to say null. Okay. So yeah, that looks good. We'll go ahead and save, and we'll get some error here if we try to search for something because there's nothing inside of our image results. Okay, it's basically saying that nothing's exported, which is true. So let's go back and let's go into our image results, and let's create a class-based component called image results. Okay, I'm going to export it down at the bottom here. And usually you do this if you're adding like prop types and stuff like that. But I do it anyways. It's just the format that I like. I don't like to export it up here. And speaking of that, we should add a prop type here for images. So let's import prop types from prop types. Oops, it should be prop dash types. And then down here, we'll go ahead and say image results dot prop types, and we want to set the images to prop types dot, and it's going to be an array, and it's going to be is required. All right, so we're going to have the images in a grid, so we need to bring that in from Material UI. We actually have quite a few things we want to bring in from Material UI. So let's say import, and we're going to bring in two things from the grid list. We want the grid list itself, and we also want the grid title. Okay, so that's going to be from material-ui / grid list. Okay, now we're also going to have like a little icon that we want to be able to click, and that will open up the dialog. So we need to bring in icon button. So let's say import icon button. So it's going to be material UI / icon button. All right, now the icon I want to use is called zoom in, and instead of just importing an entire library, we import this single icons we want to use. So we're going to import zoom in from material UI / and it's going to be an SVG icon, so it's an SVG icons / action / zoom in. Okay, and then we're also going to use the dialog, so we might as well bring that in now. So we'll say import dialog from material UI / dialog, and we're going to use the flat button as the close button, so we're going to bring that in. That'll be the last thing we bring in. So flat button from material UI / flat button. So that's everything we need to bring in. Now, in our render here, we basically want to check to see if there's any images in our properties, okay? Because as you saw when we logged the state, it basically rendered and it had an empty array at first, and then we make our request, and then that array gets filled. So we want this to run if it actually has images. So what we're going to do is above the return inside the render, we're going to initialize a variable called image list content. Okay, we're going to use let here because we're not defining it. If you use const, you're going to get an error. And then in the, or not in the return, but under the initialization here, we're going to check for the images. Okay, remember it's in props. We can actually do some destructuring here and just say const images, curly braces, images equals this dot props, and this is the same as saying const images without the curly braces equals this dot props dot images. You can think of this as like pulling it out of the this dot props. Okay, so now we can just test for images, and we're going to put an else here. So if there's images, then we'll do what we're going to do. If not, then let's set the image list content. Let's just set that to null. And you could put a spinner here if you want as well. But if there are images, then what we want to do here is set the image list content, and we're going to put all of our markup here. So let's put our grid list. So we're going to say grid list, and with grid list you can define your columns. So I'm going to define it as a 3-column grid. Oops, that should not be a question mark. So grid list, and inside the grid list here we need to map through the images. Okay, the images are coming through as a prop, and it's an array, so we need to map through these and then do what we want to do for each one. So we're going to put a set of curly braces, and we're going to say images dot map, and for each one we'll say img, and then for each one of these we want to output a grid tile. So we're going to say grid tile, so we want an opening and a closing like that. Oh, you know what? I brought this in as grid title. This should actually be tile, not title. Sorry about that. All right, so each grid tile is going to have a bunch of properties. So we want to go to the start tag here, and we're going to add in a title, and this is going to be the tags because there is actually no title to with our response from the API. So we're going to use tags, and let's see, we want to pass in a key, a unique key for each one. So we'll use the ID, so img.id. We want a subtitle. So for that, we're going to add some curly braces here, and we can actually put an element in here. We're going to put a span, and in here we're going to put we're going to say by and then the user's name, and I'm going to wrap that in strong tags. All right, so in here we can say img dot and then user. So under the subtitle, we want an action icon, because remember, we want to be able to click on the icon and then open up the dialog. And we're not going to do the dialog just yet. We'll do that after, but I want at least the icon to show. So this is where we use icon button. Okay. Oops. And inside the icon button, we actually want the icon itself, which is zoom in. Remember, we brought that in. So zoom in, and we can add a property of color, and we're going to say white. All right, and this should actually have a slash. All right, now underneath the grid tile, so it ends right here. We actually want to go in between the grid tile tags, and this is where we want to put our image. And for the source, we want to take from the image object, we want to take the large, I believe it's large image URL. And that's it. So let me see. Yeah, I think that's good. Now the last thing we want to do for this to actually work is down in the return, we just have an empty div. So of course we want to put here our image list content. Okay, and depending on if there's actually images coming in, it'll be either a grid of images or it'll just be null. So let's save this. Let me just check down here real quick. Don't worry about these are defined but never used warnings. Those are fine. So let's check it out. We'll go back to our application and let's search. I'll start to type in dog, and we get our results, and they show up. So we have the tags, and then we have by and then the username. We have our little icon, which doesn't do anything yet. We'll add that after. And then if we want to change this to 5 and we search for something else like cats, it'll get 5 cats. Good. So now notice that when I clear out the input, we still have 5 images here, and I don't want that. I want these to clear out. So we're just going to do a minor change to search.js inside of the event or inside this function, this onText change. Basically what I want to do is say if search text is empty, then let's make the images array empty. So I want to work with this e.target.value, but I want to work with it in here, and it's not going to work if I just use e.target.value down there. So I'm going to create a variable called val and set it to e.target.value, and then we can replace this right here with val, and then we can use that down here. So I'm going to just do an if statement here, or an if else. So I'm going to say if val is equal to nothing, then I want to set the state. I want to set images to an empty array. Else, then we want to do this. So I'm just going to grab all this stuff here. Let's see, this ends here. Or no, we just want this. Yeah. Okay, so we'll cut that out and we'll put that inside of the else. And that should do it. That should give us the effect that I want. Let's try it out. So if I search for dog, we get our images. Now if I clear it completely, then all the images go away. So that's how I want it to work. Good. So now we want to implement our dialog. So let's go back to image results. And for this, we're going to have to add a little bit of state. So up here, let's say state equals, and we just want one for open, which will be false. Basically, if the dialog is open or not. And then we also want one for current image, because we need to know what image to load inside of the dialog. All right. And if you look at the documentation for Material UI and you look at the dialog, let's look at the code. You can see we're doing the same thing, open, false. And then what we'll do is we'll have two functions. We'll have handle open, which will set the open to true, and handle close, which will set it to false. And then in the dialog itself, you have an open property and you just set it to that state value. Okay, and then for actions, for let's say a close button or a cancel button, we would create an array of buttons. We're only going to have a close, so we'll just have one flat button, and then you put that in a variable called actions, and you pass that into the actions property. Okay, so let's go ahead and implement that. So let's go into our render, and we want to go under this if statement here, right above the return. Actually, we're going to go. And we want to create our actions. So let's say const actions equals an array, and we want to put our flat button. This is going to take in a label of close, or let's make that uppercase C, close. And then let's say primary true. It's going to be the primary button. And then we need an on click, and that's going to call this dot handle close, like that. Okay, and that's it for the actions. Now we can create our dialog. So the dialog is going to go right below our image list content, and it's only going to show if it's ignited, if it's initialized. So don't worry about it just displaying for the hell of it. So we're going to say dialog, and then pass in our properties here. So let's say actions, which is going to be the actions we just created. Let's pass in modal, and we're going to set that to false. And let's set open to the state. So this dot state dot open, whatever that value is, true or false. And then we also want on request close, and we're going to set that to this dot handle close. All right, and inside the dialog, this should be just an opening tag, like that. All right, so inside the dialog, we want the image. So we're going to say image, and the source is going to be set to whatever the current image is. So this dot state dot current image. And I'm going to set a style here. So we're going to use some standard React inline styling. So you want to use two curly braces. And then let's say width, we want to set that to 100% of the modal of the dialog. All right, so that should be it for that. Now we have to create our handle open and handle close. So we'll go up here above render. Let's say handle open. And this is actually going to take in an image, which I didn't do down here. We'll do that after, I guess. So handle open is actually going to take in an image parameter. And we're going to then set the state. So set state. And of course, we want to set open now to true. Right, we want to set open to true, and then we also want to set the current image to the image that's passed in. All right, and then what I'm going to do is just copy this, and we're going to have handle close, which is not going to take in anything. So we're going to just replace that with an empty set of parentheses. And then we just want to set open to false. Okay, that's all this does, and we can get rid of this. Okay, so it's going to open and close our dialog, except handle open is going to pass in the image that it wants to set as the current image. Now, where do we implement this handle open? Well, remember the icon, the icon button, that's where we want to call this. So where we have this icon button, we're going to pass in an on click. Okay, so we're going to say on click. Oops. And instead of just doing this dot handle open, which would be fine if we were just calling it without a parameter, but since we're adding a parameter, what we're going to do is make this into an arrow function. So we're going to go like that, and then we're going to pass in here image dot large image URL. Okay, remember, we're mapping through the images here, and we can get all those properties, including image large URL, which is what we show in the grid, but we also want to pass it into this function so that it gets caught up here, and then we set the current image to that image. All right, so it knows what to display. And then down in the dialog, it's going to go ahead and it's going to display that, the current, whatever the current image is. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. So we'll save this, and hopefully everything works. So let's try it out. Whoops. Let's go back here, and let's say dog. Let's click this icon here, and there we go. So we have our dialog, and here's our flat button with the close. Let's try that out. That works. Awesome. So our application is working perfectly. Great. So if we want to search for something else, let's say we want 50 images of, I don't know, person. Oops. And 50 might take a minute to get, or a couple seconds. And you can see that it's getting us 50 images of person or people. All right, and I think it's a pretty decent looking application as well. I really like how the grid is and how the information here, the icons, stuff like that. So that's it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this little project. A lot of you guys were asking the requirements to take my MERN course on Udemy, which is a full stack React, Redux, Node.js course. And I basically said to know the basics of Node.js and React. And this is a nice little application to kind of get you started. Although this also implements Material UI, which is a separate library that you don't need to know. We don't use that in the course or anything. But if you're interested, check that course out. You can find it on my website, which there's a link in the description. I'll also have a link to this code on GitHub. And that's it. Please like if you like this video. If you're not subscribed and you like this type of content, please consider subscribing. Please consider supporting me through Patreon or joining my social media. Whatever you guys can do is absolutely appreciated. And thanks for watching.